poems that really marks your style are these very long sentences. Can you talk a little bit about what's going on with that?
Yeah, I think, and I think I sort of started thinking about that. It's interesting that you call it a style. That's neat.
Is that offensive?
It's so offensive. No.
Part of your steel. You do this little thing.
Yeah, little thing. I think no, it's you're right, and I think in the first book I started thinking about the way that momentum can be a kind of, how does momentum work sort of to convey a kind of emotional state or something like that. And it's become very interesting to me it's become interesting to me for a number of reasons, but one of the things that I do like is the idea of how a poem can just accumulate energy with the sentence. But then in managing long sentences, it's fun to sort of think about how syntactically you can fiddle around to make the sentence do interesting stuff and still be one sentence. Mm-hmm. If I write correct sentences, I don't know.
You do.
I don't. Yeah. So that's sort of probably a short answer for that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I should have said your voice instead of style. It's interesting talking about momentum because there is a way the sentence builds and builds and builds, but it's always held at bay by your line breaks.
Yes.
So I was interested to hear you talk a little bit about how you think about the relationship of your sentence to your line.
Yeah, it changes with different poems for sure. But I do sort of think of the poems as being accumulations of lines, and some people will think more like the sentence as the unit. But I very much sort of feel like the line itself is a sort of unit. The poem, I think, is the unit by which the poem is sort of made, like line. So if that's the case, one of the things that allows for that the sentence as a prose sentence I think doesn't necessarily allow for is that many things can be happening at once. So within a sentence there can be several sort of contradictory things. So the line and the sentence working together can allow for a kind of multiplicity of thought, action, time even. It sort of disrupts, I guess, a kind of linear way that sentences tend to work, sort of, I guess, logically, linearly, right? That a sentence tends to work. It goes toward a thing, but the line break can interrupt the way that a sentence is meaning in such a way that it can mean 6 things at once. And those 6 things can be working at different, going against each other or doing different things. That's sort of a way that I think about it.
Everyone's advice to young writers is to read.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever I ask somebody what's your advice to young writers, which I do because I teach young writers, they're like, read.
Yeah.
What other advice do you have that's not read?
I think I could come up with a lot, but because we're on this thing and I believe it, it's something like look at plants. I would say something like that if you can find plants or a plant, study it.
What if you can't find a plant?
Study something else. Yeah, like your friend. Really, so the other thing, listen, like really listen to everything. I've been trying to think of good exercises with kids I don't know why I was thinking about little kids and writing because we've been doing this teaching with the elementary school kids in Bloomington, and I've been trying to think about exercises to get them to think about zillions of perspectives, ways of looking or asking a question of objects. So what's this thing, thinking and feeling, and what's its mother think, and what's the great experience of its cousin's life, and blah blah blah. Which that'd be a bad exercise, but there's something about listening in sort of strange ways. I think I don't know how you tell a young writer to listen in strange ways and know what the hell that means.
Yeah.
But But that's what I'd say if they didn't have access to a plant at all.
We are not a listening culture.
Yeah.
I mean, my grandparents had poems memorized. They were not intellectuals.
Yeah.
You know, they were
Yeah.
working class folks. And they said part of their entertainment was reciting poems. And then the other thing they did was they listened to the radio.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Like they would sit down
Yeah.
and listen to the radio.
Right.
And we look at things, like we watch TV or
Yeah.
we watch movies or we
Right.
watch our phones.
Right.
So I do feel like we've gotten out of the practice of listening.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, totally.
I wonder about the poetry reading as an event. You seem you do things to explicitly engage the audience. Like you ask them questions,
Yeah.
you acknowledge certain audience members, you
Yeah.
know, you acknowledge the football player.
Right.
You know, you'll interrupt the poem and have an aside.
Right.
How do you think of the poetry reading as an event, given where we're at right now?
That's the thing. Like, I do feel like it's hard to listen. I feel like we're not trained to listen. And I feel like, so as a consequence, and I feel like the things that we're, you know, instead of listening, we're doing, whatever it is, watching TV or like looking at screens or something. And there's a million other things too. I feel like it's important. It's like a gift that I get to share stuff and have people listen. So, you know, it feels like an opportunity, and it feels like a, I don't know, you know, I feel like poetry readings are, you know, there's something just really fascinating to me about all of these bodies in space together, and like, you know, I love that face you did. And
Yeah.
like, you know, this, because they're like not clean, you know, a good reading is not clean, and it's like not perfect, and it's, you know, like I said, it's like this real thing of like watching each other very closely. And good readers, I feel like they're listening too.
Yeah.
They're like very much with an audience, you know, and different audiences are, you know, you have to like listen differently for different audiences. And it feels like a really kind of magical space that way. You asked me, what do I think of the poetry reading as an event? I think
Yeah.
that's sort of what you asked me.
Sort of.
Yeah, I dumbed it down. But, but I feel like it's this place of like this place of like mutual listening, you know.
What are you listening for with the audience? Like, what do you hear?
I'm listening for their listening, for how they're listening, you know, for what they're hearing, you know, for sure. And different audiences, it feels like you got to tune your ear to an audience, but it's different audiences are, you know, like like I'll be thinking about a certain set of poems I'm going to read, and I'll be like, nope, that's not it. Like these folks aren't going to be that interested, or I might lose a bunch of people with this.
And you do that at the podium while you're listening to the audience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Try to.
You try to.
Yeah. Might do the exact wrong thing. But you know, like really great readers, like, you know, I feel like they're really close. They're really, or something, like they're really paying attention. They're not, no, I should say readers who I find very interesting, they're not just like up there.
Yeah.
They're like, they're somehow with you in the audience, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you angled the podium away from yourself, so it wasn't between you and the audience.
That's another thing. Like I realized, like the podium in some way is like, I mean, obviously it's a kind of barrier, but it's also a way of like the book becomes like prominent, like it gets to be set down on the podium, and it's a way of like, I don't know what, like making the person, I mean, obviously more serious, but also in a way making the person dead. The
Well, yeah,
reader
because it
dead.
hides part of your body.
Yeah, it hides
too.
part of your body. So like when you take that away, it's like, oh, you know, you get to like, look at how, you know, ridiculous you really look. Like our, you know, big old flailing bodies, and like you spit, you know, when you read a lot, and all this shit that like stuff that when you're doing it, it's like, oh, you know, when I asked the audience like to say something that was beautiful, I know that. It's terrifying to say something in front of people. It's so terrifying. And it's just like, you know, it's because I think we mostly aren't just being our beautiful, decrepit selves, you know, in front of each other.